How you feel about where you live, how you feel about your neighbors, how you feel about the random people walking around. Like, so, for example.
But that's not necessarily a bad thing if you're living in a homogeneous area where you feel a kinship with the people that you live with.
And it doesn't even need to be homogenous necessarily, right? But that's exactly what it is. So, for example, there's two people on the way to work every single day I see, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know who they are, but every day I see these same two people. One of them is this young guy who's always riding his bike. He's got like a hoodie on, and he's got his hands in his hoodie, and he's riding with no hands. He's always doing this, right? And he always, he kind of meanders on the path as well. And there's another guy who jogs past me, and he's like this older guy. He looks about 50. And he's got this kind of weird jog where it looks like he's about to drop at every step. But every day, he's constantly jogging on one side, and I ride past him on the other, right? And so these become like familiar things in my day. These become predictable, and it makes me feel like I know where I am and I know what's coming next, right?
It feels like you're setting a reasonably low bar there. I'm sure there are communities where you've got...
But that's just my example, and I've only lived in my house for like 6 years, right? So I'm new to this particular area that I'm living in. And so if you've lived in an area your entire life, you're going to have all sorts of these markers all the time everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? It'll just be, like when you go to the pub, you come home drunk, you don't even think about how you got home. Your legs just carried you, right? Because you don't need to think about that. Because you've lived in this place for so long, you're just so used to everything around you. And so you know what your neighbors are like, you know what the problems are,
When I think of the quintessential American town, I actually think of that place that we did a segment on not so long ago, which is East Palestine,
places like that.
Yeah,
right?
the one that was hit by the by the train devastation. Yeah. It's a small town. It's got about whatever it is, like 5,000, 2,000 something people living there. It's got one high school. It's got a commercial zone, and you can just imagine. Yeah. I mean, I have no idea. I'm making this up, but I imagine.
But there are places like that everywhere.
Yeah, I could move there, and within 6 months, I could know half a dozen people who they could make the connections, and I could integrate into that society because there was an existing cultural.
You joined
mesh.
the squash, like club, or you went to
find
the pub.
Somebody that I had some connection to and be introduced to their friends. And all
exactly,
that kind of
and that's how normal life works.
That is the model that it was perhaps arrived with the founding stock of America.
Well, it's not just the founding stock. Like that's the model that a lot of the immigrants had, right? So, like, if you go back to their home countries, like Poland or Germany or something like that, these people.
Well, and I would put them along with northern sort of European. Yeah, I mean that is
like the Italians, the Irish. They come from sentimental societies, where they feel that they are Irish. They feel that they are a part of a culture.
But the family is always the basis of that unit.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it builds outwards from the family, right? And they have different kinds of family. Obviously, I'm sure you're aware that the Italians have very, very thick family relations. Like they're very, very interconnected with their parents, their grandparents, their cousins. The massive families that the Mediterraneans are famous for having, which as Northwestern Europeans, the Protestants, don't have that at all.
No, I've always really admired those families where they can have a Sunday lunch and like 30 or 40 people turn up. That must be amazing. I've never experienced
it must be
that.
a nightmare, to be honest. Well, for the person cooking, right? But the point is, like, I used to have something similar to that when I was young. Like my nan had 6 children, and so every 3 or 4 times a year, like everyone would get together at my nan's house, and so there'd be a massive house, and it was great. It was really, really nice. But most Northern Europeans aren't like that, actually. And if you think about it, it's probably a boomer thing.
To a degree, I would say most have a scaled down version of that.
Very scaled down, and and I think it's boomer mindset actually that's caused this. I think it's post World War II. The boomers had the impression that they had to be away from their family to be independent, and maybe that was possible when you had the kind of economic opportunities that the boomers squandered for everyone. But and I tell you, I see a lot of anti-boomer action on the internet these days, and I have a real difficulty disagreeing. This weird habit that you have to be away from your family to make it as an independent person. Look, there's just no need for this, right? But it goes to
the whole flying the nest sort of mentality, isn't it? Yeah,
but it goes to this sort of deeply individualistic mindset that the Protestant countries have over the Catholic countries, and I saw a graph the other day. There's a sort of map that really highlights this, where it's the Protestant countries do not offer you food, right? If you go to someone's house, you don't get offered food.
Okay.
However, in the Catholic countries, if you go to someone's house, they're going to offer to feed you, right? And
yes.
And to us, that's kind of weird, right? Because there's this individualistic mindset that suggests that actually it's kind of insulting. If I say, do you need food? What I'm saying is, you're actually not capable of feeding yourself. How incompetent are you? Actually, you need to depend on. I'll feed you because I'm not generous. But like, it's kind of insulting to ask, right? Because it's like you don't have your life together.
Okay, so that's fair.
But from the Catholic perspective, it's insulting to say, well, look, you're just not important enough to feed.
So that's fair, but I don't think America's problems are caused by the Protestant mindset.
Kind of. Well, really? Okay. Well, what I'm saying though, all I'm highlighting here is that there are great differences in Europe itself, let alone the rest of the world, and there is a kind of Protestant core to America that has this independent mindset, right? The white European stock, as in the stock, because it begins with the Anglos and those people who come over and become anglicized, and so they take on the ideology of America. Right?
But that was my initial premise, wasn't it? That the issue is that America has a governance structure which is based on a community mindset. That does not permeate through the country. So East Palestine has the same community mindset as the governing structure.
Yep.
The centre of Chicago does not have that community structure.
Right. So,
and therefore, my contention is that America is going to fail on the basis that its governing structure is incompatible with its constituents.
Yes. Like I said, something new is going to be birthed out of it. And I think we can see this in almost the command economy of the blue states, where they can't help but fall into this because of the quality of the people below. And it's not just as in they're black or they're brown or anything like that. Like, the Italians were also a problem in places like New York. This is why the mob had to be smashed. It was an ethnic Italian mob, right? Because they acted as if they were still in Sicily. Right, because this kind of thick extended family ties is alien to the Anglo experience, at least from the to the extent that it happened, and so we don't get ethnic English mobs running around.
Well, I suppose we get the football element. I mean,
but that's not like an organized gang crime.
No,
that shoots people and runs alcohol and drugs and all that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah, to be fair, our most notable examples of crime families are going to be things like the Krays, which is very small, like you're saying, Protestant groups. It is,
but it's a very small sort of family thing that happened in the East End of London. Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore.
Very high trust networks, which are necessary if you're carrying out sort of organised crime on that level, which is perhaps why they were outcompeted by, as you mentioned, the Sicilians, or more recently, it's going to be the Albanians or other groups who have stronger family connections, and therefore when they apply that family, I'm not saying that there's anything necessarily criminal about family connections. I'm simply saying that when you take that mindset and apply it to a criminal enterprise, it gives you a stronger basis, but it would also give you a stronger basis for pretty much any other kind of endeavor.
Absolutely, it does. And so it's not to say that all Italians are criminals or anything like that. But the point is, you've got a completely different mindset that is based in sentiment. Like, the love of the family is what holds it together, and then you have on the other side the kind of social contract. And now what's interesting about the sort of rules-based order of the social contract is that it's kind of our idea. It's kind of an Anglo idea that's been abstracted away from the substratum of people that had it.
Let's just make sure we're on the same page. So when I think of social contract, what I basically think of is you say to the government, I will give up my right to use violence and give that to you. And in return, you will not cross these lines.
Yep.
And you will also enforce property rights and personal liberties.
Yep.
That's okay. So we're both thinking about the same thing. Okay?
But the point is, you notice that that's essentially a legal agreement.
Yes.
But it's not just
social contract,
Yeah, but it's not just with the government. It's also with your fellow citizens.
Yes.
And so the social contract comes with it obligations and rights, right? And so the rights are intrinsic with the obligations as well. So, for example, I won't interfere with my neighbour's property, but conversely, my neighbour won't interfere with my property. Okay, well
Yes.
and so now we've got the mediator in the government who can alliterate these rights, and we all know where we stand, and that's great.
Yes.
But what that has done is remove the need for me to negotiate with my neighbour. I don't have to have a conversation about how high his fence is. I can check the regulations, and then I can get the government to come around and just do it. Get rid of that guy's fence. It's too high.
To be fair, I mean that does rarely happen. Normally in our societies, certainly in my experience, people make a real effort to sort of get on with their neighbours.
We're not a social contract society,
right?
We don't have a constitution written down formally, anyway. We're a sentimental society. Old world societies are sentimental societies, but the new world societies are, at least in theory, social contract societies. And the nature of the social contract is, of course, not very well spelled out, but it hinges on the idea that certain people, in fact, every individual has certain rights.
Yes.
And the question is, what are these rights?
So,
and that's why
before I let you go from the social contract thing, are we not a social society contract in Britain? Because, the obvious extension and perversion of what you've talked about is when you add on to it a welfare system, so the NHS. So basically, the social contract, as we talked about, you are free providing you do not cross these lines which infringe on me. But if I'm paying for your healthcare, then you have to not eat these things, and you have to not drink this many pints, and you have to do all of these things which I can impose on you through the logic of the social contract.
You would think that, but no.
But that is what I see. So why?
But you don't see that, though. That's the problem.
Yeah, we do. You see it all the time.
No, you think it should be that way.
I think the state should leave people alone. But I do see.
Sure, but if we were to engage in that line of argument, you are right. Like a sensible society would suggest that the people paying have some claim over the people receiving, right? But there's nothing about the NHS that requires you to eat a healthy diet or stop smoking. Or
I keep seeing initiatives to, for example, if I want to buy a soft drink that has sugar in it,
the government's going to nudge you towards that.
I suppose that's what you're saying. It is not overt. It is nudging.
Because they're just worried about their bottom line, right? So they're thinking, God, how can we get the NHS costs down? Well, how about if we get people to drink less alcohol? Or to stop smoking in pubs and stuff. Then we're going to have fewer percentage, a lesser thing. But there's no obligation there, right?
So that's interesting, because that suggests the social contracts based. No, what do you call us?
The sentimental
societies are incompatible with welfare programs because it cannot enforce that.
Well, hang on. No, hang on. Right. So there is absolutely a place for charity and welfare in a sentimental society, which we used to have. We used to look at the Victorian era, where it was massive amounts of charity because they were sentimental, because they thought, I should help the poor. And so that rich person in their local area did lots of philanthropic work. I mean, everyone hates Colston, but he did loads and loads of charity work.
Yeah, there is a Nordic country who does that. I can't remember which one, but their welfare is raised and collected on the very local scale.
Yeah.
So when you see somebody receiving something, I mean, it's the same people seeing it as giving it, and receiving it as knowing who gave it from. Whereas obviously that doesn't happen at the moment. What we get is, we're all taxed, and it's very amorphous as to what the taxation is for, where it's going.
Or today, I saw today that it's going to 500 million to buy houses for refugees and foreigners.
And before that, it was people who did not engage economically, but just pushed out kids and they got a free house.
So the problem with Britain is that Tony Blair tried to turn us into a social contract society.
Right.
So we have always been a sentimental society because we're an ancient society, and we had settlements built into the ethos of the communities, right? Mm-hmm. So there was. This is why the Victorians were so concerned about charity. So, because of course we've got to look after, the poor people, and there are lots of poor people. There's, lots of people struggling. Yes, we should do these things, and it's noble to do these things, right? And it's easy to see how the social contract types start leveraging this in saying, well, why should anyone be poor? It's like, well, actually, if someone doesn't do any work, then they should be poor, to be honest, is how we should have responded, because there's an obligation on your part. Yeah, we're going to give you some charity, but we're going to refuse it if you're just taking it and you're not going to try and improve yourself. If you just want to be a dependent on me forever, why should I have that? Why should I do that? If someone's down on their luck, or they got their leg shot off in a war or something, that's totally different. But for someone who can work but chooses not to and just becomes a drunk or a drug addict or whatever, why should we? But the social contract society can't distinguish between those things because these are quote unquote human rights. Right? They can't make the moral judgments that the sentimental society can make. These are just my human rights that have been laid out in full a priori in the abstract 120 or 150 years ago.
So I'll take your point that Britain is a sentimental society. What about continental Europe?
Well, which country?
Oh, let's France take the old enemy. Yep.
France is a social contract society, which is what the French Revolution was about. And in fact, the French declarations of man and citizen, the rights of man and citizen, the nobles wanted to have an obligations of man and citizen, but that got cancelled. They didn't have that because they just thought, well, we can just have, and you can see this in I think it's the UN Declaration of Rights, of Human Rights, that begins pretty good, actually. In the English fashion, the negative rights, but then it starts getting to positive rights. Everyone's got a right to have food and housing. So, okay, well, now we're into the slave state because someone's got to build that. Someone's got to pay for that.
Yes.
So you've been conscripted into a moral agenda now.
So this is perhaps beginning to explain why Canada is a communist country. But after the British, the second biggest influence on America would have been the Germanic people.
Sure.
What were they?
Well, probably mostly Protestants from Germany.
But would have been
like Norwegians?
Social contract.
Well, they almost all of the old world is sentimental, right?
Okay.
So and the French are a weird
yes, agreed.
Like the French are a sentimental society. They're sentimental for a social contract.
Right.
Like Macron had a famous thing where he's like, look, France is still missing its king. And so they've been labouring under their revolution for 300 or 200 years, whereas they are an old world society, so they are still sentimental. But the thing that the social contract does is it abstracts away the thing that you're talking about. And so we are talking about quote unquote citizens. We're not talking about Frenchmen or Englishmen or Germans or Dutch or Norwegians who are particular, right? They've got a set of characteristics and habits.
So it's less about a people, which is basically another way of saying a community, to a unit.
Yes, to the abstract individual unit. Okay. And so this is why the social contract society doesn't have any problem bringing in Somalians or Norwegians.
Because they're an additional unit that can be plugged in.
And they've all got the same rights. Right? Yes. They've been pre-allocated the same rights.
Yes.
And exactly, they're just a unit on a spreadsheet as far as we're concerned. But everyone in reality knows that there's going to be a marked difference in the kind of society that a Norwegian and a Somalian are going to produce.
And that is literally one of the big problems that this Conservative government has faced, is that the Home Secretaries have wanted to at least make the noise, but they want to slow down the immigration and the boats and that kind of stuff. Yep. But then the Treasury is saying, well, look, our OBR reports basically just takes population and multiplies it by the average GDP per head to give our projections, and then our borrowing is based on that. Yep. So if you bring in more people, our spreadsheet does not qualify what kinds of people. Yep. It's just unit multiplied by GDP per head gives us our forward projections.
But I bet the more we bring in, the lower the GDP per head goes.
It will, yes. Yes, almost certainly. But that is not how they think. That's not how they work it out.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.